Farmer Boy, Chapter 22, Fall of the Year. Wind's in the north, Father said at breakfast, and clouds coming up. We better get those beech nuts in before it snows. The beech trees grew in the timber lot 2 miles away by the road, but only half a mile across the fields. Mr. Webb was a good neighbor, and let Father drive across his land. Almanzo and Royal put on their caps and warm coats. Alice put on her cloak and her hood, and rode away with Father in the wagon to gather the beech nuts. When they came to a stone fence, Almanzo helped to take it down and let the wagon through. The pastures were empty now, and all the stock was in the warm barns, so they could leave the fences down until the last trip home. In the beech grove, all the yellow leaves had fallen, and they lay thick on the ground beneath the slim trunks and delicate bare limbs of the beeches. The beech nuts had fallen after the leaves and lay on top of them. Father and Royal lifted the matted leaves carefully on their pitchforks and put them, nuts and all, on the wagon, and Alice and Almanzo ran up and down in the wagon, trampling down the rustling leaves to make room for more. When the wagon was full, Royal drove away with Father to the barns, but Almanzo and Alice stayed to play till the wagon came back. A chilly wind was blowing in the sunlight and was hazy. Squirrels frisked about, storing away nuts for the winter. High in the sky, the wild ducks were honking and hurrying south. It was a wonderful day for playing wild Indian among the trees. When Almanzo was tired of playing Indian, he and Alice sat on a log and cracked beech nuts in their teeth. Beech nuts are 3-cornered and shiny brown and small, but every shell is solidly full of nut. They are so good that nobody could ever eat enough of them. Well, at least Almanzo never got tired of eating them before the wagon came back. Then he and Alice trampled down leaves again, while the busy pitchforks made the patch of bare ground larger and larger. It took almost all day to gather the beech nuts in the cold twilight. Almanzo helped to lay up the stone fences behind the last load. All the beech nuts in their leaves made a big pile on the south barn floor beside the farming mill. That night, Father said they'd seen the last of the Indian summer. "It will snow tonight," he said. Sure enough, when Almanzo woke the next morning, the light had a snowy look from the window. He saw the ground and the barn roofs were white with snow. Father was pleased. The snow was 6 inches deep, and the ground was not yet frozen. "Poor man's fertilizer," Father called such a snow, and he set Royal to plowing it all in the fields. It carried something from the air into the ground that would make the crops grow. Meanwhile, Almanzo helped Father. They tightened the barn's wooden windows and nailed down every board that had loosened in the summer sun and rain. They banked the walls of the barn and straw from the stalls, and they banked the walls of the house with clean, bright straw. They laid stones on the straw to hold it snug against the winds, and they fitted the storm doors and storm windows on the house just in time. That week ended with the first hard freeze. Bitter cold had come to stay, and now it was butchering time. In the cold dawn before breakfast, Almanzo helped Royal to set up the big iron cauldron next to the barn. They set it on stones, and they filled it with water and lighted a bonfire under it. It held 3 barrels of water. Before they had finished, Lazy John and French Joe had come, and there was a time to snatch only a bite of breakfast. 5 hogs and a yearling beef were all to be killed that day. As soon as one was killed, Father and Joe and John dipped the carcass into the boiling cauldron and heaved it out and laid it on boards with butcher knives, and they scraped all the hair off it. Then they hung it up by the hind feet in a tree and cut it open and took all the insides out into a tub. Almanzo and Royal carried the tub into the kitchen, and Mother and the girls washed the heart and the liver and snipped off all the bits of fat from the hog's insides to make lard. Father and Joe skinned the beef carefully. The hide came off in one big piece. Every year, Father killed a beef and saved the hide to make shoes. All that afternoon, the men were cutting up meat, and Almanzo and Royal were hurrying to put it away. All the pieces of fat pork were packed away in barrels down in the cellar. The hams and shoulders they slid carefully into the barrels of brown pork pickle, which Mother had made of salt, maple sugar, saltpeter, and water boiled together. Pork pickle had a stinging smell that felt like a sneeze. Spare ribs, backbones, hearts, livers, tongues, and all the sausage meat had to go in the woodshed attic. Father and Joe hung the quarters of beef there, too. The meat would freeze in the attic and stay frozen all winter. Butchering was finished that night. French Joe and Lazy John went whistling home and fresh meat to pay for their work, and Mother baked spare ribs for supper. Almanzo loved to gnaw the meat from the long, curved, flat bones. He liked the brown pork gravy, too, the creamy mashed potatoes. All the next week, Mother and the girls were hard at work, and Mother kept Almanzo in the kitchen to help. They cut up the pork fat and boiled it in big kettles on the stove. When it was done, Mother strained the clear, hot lard through white cloths in big stone jars. Crumbling brown cracklings were left inside the cloth after. Mother squeezed it, and Almanzo sneaked a few and ate them whenever he could. Mother said they were too rich for him. She put them away to be used for seasoning cornbread. Then she made the head cheese. She boiled the 6 heads until the meat came off with the bones, and she chopped it and seasoned it and mixed it with liquor from the boiling and poured it into 6-quart pans. When it was cold, it was like jelly, for a gelatin had come out of the bones. Next, Mother made mincemeat. She boiled the best bits of beef and pork and chopped them fine. She mixed in raisins and spices and sugar and vinegar, chopped apples and brandy, and she packed 2 big jars full of mincemeat. It smelled delicious. Then she let Almanzo eat the scraps left in the mixing bowl. All this time, he was grinding sausage meat. He poked thousands of pieces of meat into the grinder, and he turned the handle round and round. For hours and hours, he was glad when that was finished. Mother seasoned the meat and molded it into big balls, and Almanzo had to carry all those balls into the woodshed attic and pile them up on clean cloths. They would be there frozen all winter, and every morning Mother would mold 1 ball into little cakes and fry them for breakfast. The end of butchering time was candle making. The picture is candle making, not sausage or butchering. Mother scrubbed the big lard kettles and filled them with bits of beef fat. Beef fat doesn't make lard, it melts into tallow. When it was melting, Almanzo helped string the candle molds. A candle mold was 2 rows of tin tubes fastened together and standing straight on 6 feet. There were 12 tubes on a mold, and they were at the top, but a tapered point at the bottom, and in each point there was a tiny hole. Mother cut a length of candle wicking for each tube. She doubled the wicking across a small stick and twisted it into a cord. She licked her thumb and finger and rolled the end of the cord into a sharp point. When she had 6 cords on the stick, she dropped them into 6 tubes on the stick and lay on top of the tubes. The points of the cords came through the tiny holes in the points of the tubes, and Almanzo pulled each one tight and held it by sticking a raw potato on the tube's sharp point. When every tube had a wick held straight and tight down in the middle, Mother carefully poured hot tallow. She filled every tube on the top. Then Almanzo set the mold outdoors to cool. When the tallow was hard, he brought the mold in. He pulled up the potatoes, and Mother dipped the whole mold quickly in boiling water and lifted the sticks, and 6 candles came up on each stick. Then Almanzo cut them off the stick. He trimmed the ends of wicking off the flat ends and just enough wicking to light on each pointed end, and he piled the smooth straight candles in waxy white piles. All one day Almanzo helped Mother make candles, and that night they had made enough candles to last until butchering time next year.